objective is going to consist of using a generic rectangle to multiply to find the product or to turn the product into a sum. This will make it a lot easier for us instead of having to use algebra tiles. So let's start off by reviewing what it means to write the area as a product and as a sum. Please take a look at the image off to the right and write down the product for this and also write down the sum for this rectangle. Please pause the video to give time for students to complete that task. Here's the answer for writing the area of this rectangle as both a product and as a sum. Remember that a product needs to be written with parentheses and that it represents the length times the width to get the area for this rectangle. The sum is what the rectangle is composed of. So the algebra tiles that make up that rectangle, and that's where you can see your 8x squareds, your 22x's, and your 15 ones. Now, I told you in the beginning of this video that we're going to move away from algebra tiles, and here's how we're going to do that. At this next image, I want you to take a look at and compare how one rectangle is different than the other. So please pause this video and give time for students to talk to their partner about how these two images are similar and how they are different. So hopefully that you noticed the same similarities and differences that I did. The similarities is that the length and the width of these two rectangles are the same and that the area is also the same. The biggest difference, though, is that one image, the generic rectangle, uses numbers instead of actually drawing each and every individual algebra tile. And that's going to save us a lot of time. And so what we're going to do next is get practice with writing the generic rectangle after we take a few notes. So actually we're going to practice a few to begin with. So if you could please open up your classwork notebook and copy down these 4 problems. For letter A, what we're going to do is we are going to make that generic rectangle and divide it into 4 different spaces. We are going to take the length times the width. So we have to put the dimensions of our rectangle on the outside. So x plus 5 and 3x plus 2. Now what we are going to do is multiply to get the area of each rectangle. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take the 3x times the x. And that's going to give me 3x squared. The next thing that I'm going to do is take the x times the 2. And that's going to give me 2x. Following that, I'm going to take the 3x and multiply it by the 5. That's going to give me 15 x's. And then lastly, I'm going to take the 2 times the 5, and that's going to give me 10. Now, the last thing that you need to do is write it as a sum. That means that you need to take your answer out of the generic rectangle and combine like terms. So 3x squared plus 17x plus 10. Please pause this video and answer letters B, C, and D. We'll see how you did in a few minutes. For letter B, be careful you need to make sure you represent that -5 with a negative. Make sure be careful when you're combining like terms with both positive and negative y's. Your final answer should say 10y squared plus -11y plus -35. Let's check answer to letter C. Now hopefully you looked at letter C and saw that, well, I could use the distributive property to multiply these two products. However, I'm going to show you what that looks like using the generic rectangle. I'm going to place the 3x off to the side, 6y, and -11. Now notice my generic rectangle is smaller than the previous two problems. The reason why is because of the fact that I only have one term that's outside of my parentheses, whereas before, each of the other problems had two terms inside of their parentheses. We'll take a look at more problems like this style in the future. But I'm just going to go ahead and start multiplying, just like what I did in letters A and B. So 3x times 6y, that's 18xy. And 3x times -11 is -33x. Again, I cannot leave my answer in the generic rectangle. I do have to write it as a sum. 18xy plus -33x. Letter D is a challenge because I do have two terms in that first parentheses, but notice that I have 3 in the second set of parentheses. Here's how I'm going to modify my generic rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and draw it just like I normally did. I have 2 terms in that first set of parentheses, so the 5w and the -2p, but I had 1, 2, 3 terms in that second parentheses, so I need 1, 2, and 3 columns to represent my width. So 3w, p, and -4. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply just like I did in the previous 3 problems. So I went ahead and multiplied that last generic rectangle. But one thing that I want you to notice is that WP and PW are like terms, because remember, multiplication order does not matter. So when I combine like terms, I need to make sure that I put those two together. So again, you cannot leave your answer in the generic rectangle. You do have to write it as a sum. So your final answer should say 15w squared plus -WP or PW plus -2, sorry, my negative got a little messy, -2p squared plus -20w plus 8p. That is the solution to that multiplication problem. Let's go ahead and formalize some notes. So open up your classwork notebook to the notes section. More specifically, open it up to the index and make sure to add page 11 is multiplying binomials using the generic rectangle. Go ahead and pause the video to make sure that all students are ready to move on. It might be helpful too to start labeling your index based off of the chapters in which we discussed each one of these notes. So if you wanted to, take the time and add that information. It will be easier to reference in regards to studying for any retakes that you may be interested in doing. Now let's move on to our notes. Here's today's objective for our notes. I can multiply expressions using a generic rectangle. Please start copying this down into the notes section of your notebook. How can we express areas? We can express an area as a product and as a sum. Remember that when you're expressing an area as a product, you are using parentheses. When you're representing the area as a sum, you are using addition. Now, even though this example is a distributive property example, it is still represented as a product because of the use of multiplication and parentheses. So what I'm going to do is turn that product into a sum by distributing that 2x within inside of the parentheses. My final answer would say 2x squared plus 8x. Now our next two examples are more specifically geared towards the generic rectangle. So let's again practice writing our generic rectangles for letters A and B. Remember that you have the length and the width, so that's how I'm going to set up my generic rectangle. Make sure to carry that negative for the 3 in regards to the width. And then multiply to get the interior area of your rectangle. Here is the solution to example letter A. Notice how it is 2x squared, negative 3x, 10x, and negative 15. Remember to make sure that you combine like terms and be very careful with your positive and negative x's. Let's move on to letter B. Again, you have your length and your width. So when we go to draw our generic rectangle, we're going to place our length and make sure we have that negative 7, 6y, and that negative 1. Again, we're multiplying to find the sum to get the interior area of our rectangle. Multiplying to get the 24y squared, the negative 4y, negative 42y, and the positive 7. I'm going to go ahead and combine my terms and write my area as a sum. My final answer should say 24y squared plus negative 46y plus a positive 7. Now go ahead and write your summary. You are going to draw rectangles based on the number of terms within the parentheses. Make sure you write it as a product on the outside. So that's placing your length and your width on the outside of your rectangle. Remember to multiply. A lot of students will start adding. We're not adding in the rectangles. We are multiplying. You add the insides to get the answer when you go to write the sum. That's basically saying don't forget to combine your like terms. I have one more generic rectangle that I'd like you to try on your own. Please put this on a clean sheet of paper as you are going to be turning it in. Make sure your name is on it. And here is your last question. Please multiply using a generic rectangle. So I do want to see all of your work. Remember that your homework for over the weekend is problems 27 through 32. And we will revisit this topic again on Monday. With the remaining time of class, if there is any, please use it to start working on your homework assignment, and have a great weekend.